Hello, fifth grade, welcome back. Today we are going to be moving on to topic 7. And topic 7 is going to be all about adding and subtracting fractions. So we're going to do a lot of fraction work in this topic. We're going to start with lesson 7.2, which is going to be all about common denominators. Our objective today is we will find the least common denominator for fractions with unlike denominators. So let's just quickly review the parts of a fraction. So remember that the top number of a fraction is called the numerator, and the bottom part of the fraction is called the denominator. So also remember that the denominator tells us how many total equal parts there are, and the numerator tells us how many equal parts that we actually have. So that's the shaded amount that you see here. So today we're going to focus on finding common denominators. So we're going to review a little bit, and then I'm going to show you how to find common denominators. So we already gone over what a denominator is, but again, the denominator is the bottom number in a fraction, and it shows how many equal parts the item is divided into. So for this pizza that you see here, you can see that there are 4 equal pieces of the pizza, but 3 of them are still left. So our fraction is 3/4. So what is a common denominator? When the denominators of 2 or more fractions are the same, they have common denominators. So you can see over here, we have 2/5 plus 1/5. Both of the denominators are 5, which means that they're common or the same. So that's what we're going to be finding today for our work. Today, we're not just going to look for common denominators, we're going to look for the least common denominator. And what that means is that it's the smallest of all the common denominators. Another question that you might have is why? Why do we want common denominators? Well, the reason we want common denominators is because we can't add fractions with different denominators. So as you can see here, we have a pizza that's showing the fraction 1/3 plus the fraction 1/6. We can't add those two fractions up because the denominators are not the same. If we wanted to add them up, we would have to make the denominators the same by finding their common denominator. In order to find our least common denominator, in order to add or subtract, we first need to find the least common multiple, also known as LCM, for each of the denominators. So before we get into finding least common multiples, we need to discuss what a multiple is. So a multiple, or we get a multiple of a number when we multiply it by another number. So we would multiply it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., not 0, because whenever we multiply by something by 0, it just stays 0. So just like a multiplication table. So here are some examples down here. So if you look here, where it has the 4, these multiples are multiplied by 1, 2, 3, and so on. So the multiples are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, 44, and on and on and on, okay? The multiples of 4 go up by 4 every time. It's like counting by 4s. Same thing with 5. 5 times 1 would be 5. 5 times 2 would be 10, then would come 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, okay? So that's what we mean when we say multiple. Taking it a little further, we need to talk about what a common multiple is. So say we have listed the first few multiples of 4 and 5. The common multiples are those that are found in both lists. So you can see that 20 and 40 are found in both the lists of multiples of 4 and multiples of 5. So they are common multiples. And if we continued these lists, there would be more common multiples ahead. So once we have listed the multiples and found which multiples are in common with each other, we then need to find what the least common multiple is. And the least common multiple is simply the smallest of the common multiples. So if we look back at this chart of the multiples of 4 and 5, we know that 20 and 40 are common multiples. The least common multiple is going to be the smallest of them. So 20 is the smallest common multiple in each of their lines. So that is going to be what our least common multiple is. Our least common multiple of 4 and 5 is 20. So for today's work, we're just going to focus on the part of finding common denominators by just finding the least common multiple. Tomorrow, we'll take it a step further, and we will change our fractions to represent the common multiples and common denominators that we found. But today, we're just going to focus on getting used to finding the least common multiple, because you're going to have to do this each time you find a common denominator. So let's start with these two numbers, 2 and 7, and we're going to list out the multiples. So this is what you're going to be doing for your work today. So for 2, I'm just going to think about what my multiples of 2 are. So it's really like counting by 2s, okay? So I always say to start with the first 5 multiples, and if you don't see one that's in common, then you can add some more. So I would put down 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so these are my first 5 multiples of 2. Now I'm going to list my first 5 multiples of 7. So 7, 14, 21, 28, and 35. Okay, so now I'm going to compare my 2 rows and see if I see anything that's in common. And honestly, for these 2 numbers, I don't right now. So that means that I need to keep going, okay? But I don't need to keep going for both, because my line for 7, my multiples of 7 go all the way up to 35. So what I'm going to do is keep that one where it is, the first 5, but I'm going to continue with my list of multiples of 2 because it only goes up to 10. Okay, so I'm going to keep going and see if I can find anything that they have in common. So after 10, I would put 12. Then comes 14, 16, 18, and 20. Now I'm going to review my rows again and see if I have anything in common. And this time I do have something in common. They both have the number 14. So for 2 and 7, the least common multiple, and I'll just put LCM, equals 14. All right, so there may be times where you do have to add more multiples to find one that's common, just like I did here. But always first start with the first 5. All right, let's find the least common multiple for 4 and 6. So I'll start with 4. So like 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 4 is 16. Let's try that again. And 4 times 5 is 20. So you can see how on this one, I am thinking about my times table. So this is where you're really just thinking about a number, a multiplication chart, how you would just read across the multiplication chart where your 4 is, okay? So same thing, I'm counting by 4s or I'm thinking about my multiplication times tables. Either way, it's going to give you your multiples of 4. All right, so I did my first 5. Let's do my first 5, 4, 6. So we'll do 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 5 is 30. So now let's go and see if I have any multiples that they have in common, and we will highlight them. So I'm looking at 4, no 4 down here. Looking at 8, no 8 down here. I have a 12 and a 12. So I'm going to highlight a 12 and a 12. And I think that's all for what's listed. So our least common multiple for 4 and 6 is 12. Now, if I continued my multiples, so if I did more than 5, I definitely would have more in common. But remember, we're going to focus on finding the smallest one, the least common multiple. All right, so now you're going to go ahead and in your team's notebook, you are going to do today's independent work, which is where you are going to list the multiples of two numbers and then find the one that they have in common, the least common multiple, and that is going to be your answer for each problem.